Okay, as I said, we're going to move a little more faster than we had been doing. So yesterday we did the sixth parak that dealt with the theme of Devorah. We now come to the seventh parak that deals with Tiferes. So remember, Chesed, Devorah. Chesed is the right side, Devorah is the left side, Tiferes is the synthesis. Remember, in the imagery of Kabbalah, Tiferes is the mizug, the mixture, the integration, the synthesis, the balance between Chesed and Devorah. Thus, for example, according to the Mekubalim, Avram Avinu represents the totality of Chesed, Yitzchak represents containment and Devorah, but each one by itself has a defect. The Chesed alone produces a Yishmael, and Devorah alone produces an Esav. There's what's called a Pasolas, something that is negative. Yaakov Avinu represents the combination of the Chesed of Avraham and the Devorah of Yitzchak, and that produces a harmonization, that produces a balance, from which, so Tiferes is actually the conduit of all of the Hashpa'os that then gets sent down to Netzach, Hod, Yesod, into Malchus, but really Tiferes is the great center in which the Chesed and Devorah of the world, of the universe, is balanced. This is why Yaakov Avinu, who represents Tiferes, is the face on Hashem's Kisei HaKavod, the human face. That is why Yaakov Avinu is what is called Mitaso Shalema. All of his progeny are holy. I mean, we've had our problems to be sure, but every single child of Yaakov is part of Am Yisrael, the nation of Yisrael, because Tiferes is that completion. So again, Tiferes is connected to a few things. Tiferes is connected to Yaakov. Tiferes is connected to Torah, because Torah too is the balance of giving and holding back. In Torah, there's an integration. I think we had spoken about this. This is why the Gemara in Shabbos tells us that every aspect of Matan Torah is connected to the number 3. The Gemara in Shabbos says, Daresh Shahu Galilah, a man from Galil, we're not given his name, said, Barich Rachamana, blessed is God, Diyoyev Lanai Raisa Tolisai, he gave us a threefold Torah, Torah Nevi'im Kesuvim, Li'ama Tolisai, to a threefold nation, Kohen Levi Yisrael, Biyarcha Tolisai in the third month, counting from Nisan, Nisan Iyar Sivan, after 3 days of separation. Now, the Gemara doesn't explain anything. The Gemara just says there's a lot of threes, just like we all know that when it comes to Pesach, which is coming up, for different reasons, the number 4 is real important. There are 4 sons, there are 4 questions, there are 4 Lashonos of Geula, 4 terms of redemption, and because of that there are 4 cups of wine, right? So Pesach, everybody knows 4 is the secret number. Maybe we'll talk about that later. But when it comes to Matan Torah, it's not 4 that's the number, it is 3 that's the number. So what is the significance of 3 in the inyanim of Matan Torah? So the Maral says that 3 has a symbolic meaning. Imagine a triangle where at the base of the triangle you have 2 opposites, 2 points at the 2 ends of the base in opposite directions. But when you draw diagonal lines, so to speak, from the point to the apex, to the top of the triangle, in a sense, the apex synthesizes the extremities. And therefore, 3 is the number of synthesis, integration, harmonization of things that otherwise exist in the opposite extreme. So the Torah is, above all, a synthesis. The Torah is a harmonization. The Torah is a balance in a number of ways. It is a balance between the body and the soul, because we are comprised of a physical body, which is connected to the Yetzer Hara, which has material needs, whether it's eating, drinking, sleeping, whatever it is. And the Yetzer Hara pushes for the needs of the body, or the wants of the body, or the luxuries of the body, whatever you want to call it. But then we have a divine soul that wants to be connected to God. In fact, the divine soul doesn't really like even being in this world. The divine soul would rather not even be here at all. But God sends it here. We're here for a mission. So the Torah, by stressing the idea that you can take even physicality and elevate it, and you don't have to serve God by asceticism and renunciation, the Torah is balancing body and soul. It harmonizes what otherwise would be opposite forces. The body would normally work in opposition to the soul. The Torah gives us way. Actually, this ties into what we talked about yesterday, serving God with your HaRav. Right? That would apply to eating, sleeping as well, in which you do it l'shem shemayim. So the Torah is connected to three because it balances body and soul. The Torah is connected to three because Kabbalistically it balances chesed and gevurah. Right? The Torah instructs us when do you show love and when do you have to have discipline and self-containment. The rules of the Torah guide you in that particular way. So Tiferes, and that's why, by the way, the Maharal's Sefer on Kabbalah Satira is called Tiferes Yisrael, because the Torah is the Midah of Tiferes. Okay, so Tiferes, balance, harmony. Tiferes, Yaakov Avinu. Tiferes, Torah. Tiferes is also called Emes. All of these things are connected. Why? Number one, the Torah is Emes, obviously. Number two, in a more even fundamental way, only balance and harmony are really truth, meaning to say any veering to an extremity is going to be a distortion of truth by definition. Chesed standing alone is not emes. Gevurah standing alone is not emes. It is only when chesed and gevurah are combined that there is emes, right? Emes involves integrating opposite perspectives. They say by the Alter of Slatka that, who really was, who knows? The Alter of Slatka was actually, it's so interesting. He was a public figure, but the truth is, he was really an enigma. He was a mystery to everybody because no one knew where he came from. Where did he learn? No one has any idea whatsoever, etc. Really, he kind of came out of nowhere. And what was his position in the great Slobodka Yeshiva? He was not Rosh Yeshiva. He was not Mashgiach. He was not a Rebbe. He had no position whatsoever. He just ran the place, but there was no position that he had at all. And he would come and he would disappear, and yet, Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky used to say, Hasidim say that Misnagdim don't have a Rebbe like a Hasidic Rebbe. He says, but we had a Rebbe. He was the Alter of Slatka. He was like our Rebbe. I don't mean Rebbe in the sense like a Rebbe of Bashir. He was like our guide in life, in every way. And the Alter almost had, maybe he had Ruach HaKodesh. I'm not sure what it was, but the Alter could I heard from my own Rosh Yeshiva, Rav Ruderman, who was Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky's cousin, and they were in Slobodka at the same time with Rav Aaron Kotler and Rav Yitzchak Kutner, all the great Gedolim, that the Alter could look at a guy who just came to Yeshiva and predict where he was going to be in 25 years. He had that type of intuition. This will be a posek. This will be a Rav. This will be an apikoros. He knew. He met you one time, and he knew exactly where you were going and what you were going to become, and the like. So it is said that people would ask him shilas for advice, and he would often give opposite answers. He would tell one person, "Do this," and then somebody else came with the same shaila, seemingly the same shaila. And the Alter said something totally opposite. And when the guys were talking about it, and they came up with hey, the Alter said this, and the Alter said this, and it was totally opposite, and they were all confused because these are opposite answers to the same question. So they would go to the Alter and they'd say, you told him this, and you told him this, what is it? So the Alter would just smile and say, something and its opposite. Davor v'hipucho. This is the midah of Hashem. to integrate the opposites. Aiseh Shalom b'mromav, Hashem makes peace in heaven. Shemayim is fire and water. Hashem combined. I mean, the short answer is that the Alter understood that everybody was unique, and therefore there are nuances. There's no such thing. In other words, there is no such thing as the same question. You think superficially, oh, he asked the same question as him. Yeah, you might think so, but no. Every question comes from a different person, and therefore for one person the answer would be this. For one person the answer would be this. So the Alter reveled in kind of the enigma of balancing different things, different responses. That's why the one thing the Talmidim of the Alter are known for, and I think this even includes to the Talmidim of the Talmidim of the Talmidim, is that people are individuals, that it's not Torah life, although there is obviously a common denominator, obviously, mitzvahs and the like, but Torah life is not a one-size-fit-all. But everyone is an individual, and everyone has to be nurtured as an individual. But this goes back Kabbalistically. It's ultimately rooted in Kabbalah that Tiferes requires the harmonization of opposites and not simply going to one extreme or another extreme, right? So look at all of these associations. They're all connected. Tiferes is Torah. Tiferes is Yaakov. Tiferes is integration, balance, harmony in terms of chesed and gevurah. Tiferes is emes, because that is emes, right? Emes is when you combine the opposites. Now that could be very, very uncomfortable because in some ways, you feel there's a greater clarity if you have one central thing that you focus on, right? So I know my direction, but unfortunately maybe, or maybe fortunately, life is more complicated than that. So you often do have to consider many, many other things. Hence, that is the source of hate mail and other types of things. No, I mean seriously. When people are fixated on a particular point, and therefore when you try to introduce considerations about a different point that doesn't fit that point, they get angry, they get upset, and the like, which I understand because a person is focused on a particular point as their central reference. But once again, remember that Tiferes is the midah of harmonization and balance and integration. And again, the Alter of Slatka was just uniquely suited in that particular way. And it's amazing. Again, it's just amazing because if you look for a biography, you won't find it. I mean, nobody knows where he came from. I mean, he started getting involved in creating yeshivas in his late 30s, 40s, and until then, almost a total mystery. And afterwards, he was a public figure, but he was still very, very mysterious. And yet, he was the influence. Rav Aaron Kotler, Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky, Rav Yitzchak Kutner, Rav Yechiel Yaakov Weinberg, the Sri Dayesh, Rav Ruderman, certainly, and many, many Gedolim who came to Eretz Yisrael as well. Just an amazing, amazing force. More so, I would say, than even the Rosh Yeshiva, even though he didn't give a Gemara shir, but in terms of the hashkafa and direction in life, he was the force of these great Gedolim. Okay, so this is Tiferes. So therefore, Perek Shvi, the seventh Perek, is devoted to the idea of how do I activate Tiferes to come into the world. So the Talmud Devorah really starts off, he makes a central point, but then he spends most of the Perek not addressing the central point. In other words, the central point is you bring Tiferes into the world by learning Torah. Okay, that's the basic idea. Tiferes is connected to Torah, so by learning Torah, I activate the light of Tiferes that shines in the world. Okay, that's the central point. But then the Talmud Devorah qualifies this with a digression that is actually much, much longer than the central point. So there's a central point, but then he qualifies it with something that apparently is extremely important. And that is, he talks about the notion of humility, the notion of anava, which once again the Ramak talks about in virtually every perek, one way or the other. But he makes the point of it's very important that when you learn Torah and you bring the shefa of Tiferes in the world, you don't learn Torah with an attitude of arrogance and gaiva, because it's a midah keneged midah. Because if you're in your arrogance and gaiva, you remove yourself from people. You hold yourself above them. You consider yourself better than them. Then the midah of Tiferes withdraws from you and from the world and goes up. Meaning, you go up from people, right? A Baal Gaiva, you raise yourself above people in your learning. The Tiferes raises itself above the world. Which means to say, in spite of the fact that Torah learning would normally bring the Tiferes into the world, when the Torah learning is with arrogance and gaiva and thinking that one is better than other people, the midah keneged midah is you remove yourself from people with a sense of superiority. The Tiferes removes itself from Malchus, because ultimately Tiferes, through Netzach, Hod, Yesod, gives to Malchus, which is the Shechina in this world. So you want Tiferes to be connected to Malchus one way or the other, and you cause Tiferes to separate from Malchus by your gaiva. Yeah?
Does it also apply to other areas of Yiddishkeit, this concept of gaiva?
Yeah, it certainly does. But again, the reason why, and indeed it's brought up in other prakim, but the reason why it's specifically discussed in connection with Torah learning is because we're concerned with Tiferes. Now, Tiferes comes into the world by Torah learning. The gaiva drives it away. Now, so that's the basic idea. Now, then the Ramak, once again, the Ramak was a very, very creative Kabbalistic thinker who, I feel embarrassed even saying it, but he was almost poetic in his symbolism, says the following. He subdivides it, right? So the basic idea is Torah learning brings Tiferes into the world. The second idea is that gaiva in your Torah learning causes Tiferes to separate from Malchus. He then takes it in more detail, and he says the following. Tiferes is mashpia on 4 levels below it, right? Because remember, because after Tiferes we have Netzach, eternity, Hod, glory, Yesod, foundation, which is the male Aver, and then Malchus, which is the feminine Shechina. So there are 4 layers below Tiferes that Tiferes shines its light upon. Right? The 4 levels, the 4 spheros below Tiferes are Netzach, Hod, Yesod, and Malchus. Now, for reasons that he will explain, we're going to count Netzach and Yesod as one. They often function as one. So therefore, he says, the notion of these 4 lower spheros, counting Netzach and Yesod, I'm sorry, I don't mean that, I mean Netzach and Hod as one. Netzach and Hod as one, not Netzach and Yesod. Netzach, Hod, Yesod, Malchus represent 3 types of gaiva you can have. And he says the following. So let me first list the 3 types of arrogance that a Talmud Chacham might have. Arrogance number 1 is called, so I'll list, before I get into the Kabbalah thing, let's just list what these are. The first type of arrogance is miskoeh al talmidav. He is arrogant vis-a-vis his students. Either he doesn't want to be bothered with their questions, he doesn't want to talk to them about the things that bother them, he considers himself so superior to them that, how dare they disturb him, and the like. So that is a gaiva vis-a-vis talmidim, meaning he is not as devoted to his talmidim as he should be, because he thinks that there are better ways of spending his time. That's category 1 gaiva, and again I'll connect it in a moment. Category 2 is hamiskoeh b'toraso al ha'oni umevaza osa. He has a certain gaiva, not with respect to his talmidim necessarily, but people who don't count, people who are insignificant, people who are poor, people who are powerless, people who don't have connections, or in Eretz Yisrael we would say, people without protexia. In other words, he's going to befriend people that can advance him in different ways. But people who can't advance him, whether they're secretaries or security guards or janitors or garbage collectors, or just people who are generally poor and, insignificant externally, seem to be insignificant. Right? So that's a certain gaiva vis-a-vis people that he considers lower than him. That's a second type of thing. And the third type is he looks down at Jews who are ignorant in Torah. So these are not necessarily Talmidim and not necessarily Aniyim, but Amaratzim. He looks down at them. He says he doesn't want to have anything to do with Amaratzim. So these are three forms of arrogance. So listen how the Ramah connects it. He says, very beautiful thing. He says that Netzach and Hod, the right leg, remember the idea that Chesed is the right arm, Devorah is the left arm, Tiferes is the torso, Netzach is the right leg, Hod is the left leg, Yesod is the male organ, a Malchus is called the female, Malchus is called the Nukva, and the like, right? That's the body representation of the Tiferes. So he brings, now again, these are ideas that are not even explained here. They're mainly in the Pardes Rimonim, the Ramak's big Sefer of Kabbalah. But he describes that in the Zohar, Netzach and Hod, the legs, are called Limudei Hashem. They are called the students. They are the students of Tiferes, because they are the ones who directly receive from Tiferes. So he says the following. He says, there's a midah keneged midah. If I am miska'eh, and I'm not willing to teach my Torah to my Talmidim, answering their questions and spending time with them, then I'm gairem that Tiferes will not deliver its light to its Talmidim, which are called Netzach and Yesod. So Netzach and Hod. So the blockage occurs pretty high up, meaning the Tiferes doesn't even go into the Netzach and the Hod, because they are called Limudei Hashem, they are called the disciples, and therefore I don't teach my disciples, Tiferes will not be mashpia on its disciples. So, now again, we don't really understand the difference between, we live in this world, right? This world gets from Malchus. So we really don't know what's the difference if the blockage occurs in Yesod or the blockage occurs higher up. We just don't understand what that is. So you have to take it on faith that blockages can occur at different levels in the delivery system, and when those blockages occur in different levels, there will be different effects. You understand the problem. We don't know, or I don't know exactly what that means. What's the difference if a blockage is here or there? It doesn't get to me. That may be true, but cosmically there are differences where the blockage occurs. So the Ramak is saying, when you're miska'eh al hatalmidim, you are blocking the light of Tiferes in Netzach and Hod, because Netzach and Hod are called the Talmidim, Limudei Hashem of Tiferes. Why that is so exactly, that's in the Pardes Rimonim, but this is the imagery of Limudei Hashem. Now, when you are miska'eh on an oni, people who are insignificant, people who are not important. So here you'll remember, he actually gave this imagery before. You may recall that Yesod is also called oni, because it kind of has nothing of its own, it only delivers. Right? Remember, la'oni. So he says, at that point, what you're doing is you're blocking Tiferes. So it may go to Netzach and Hod, but it won't go into Yesod. Right? So that's the idea. So Miska'eh al Talmidim, you're ma'akev the hashpa in Netzach and Hod. When you're Miska'eh al Ha'aniyim, you're blocking the hashpa into Yesod. And then finally he says, when you're miskoya al am haaretz, you look down at ignorant people, right? They're not worthwhile to converse with. So that's the ground. What does Amaretz mean? People of the earth. They're like dirt. They're like earth. That's Malchus. Malchus is considered to be earth because it's the lowest level. And and just like the earth is makabel. The earth is makabel rain and seed and everything else. So too, Malchus is makabel from all the other hashpos. So the way it works is when you're miskaya alam haratzim, so you prevent, even if it goes into netzach and hod and yisod, you're ma'akev it from going into Malchus. So what the Ramak is trying to say is that each type of gaiva prevents the light of Tiferes from shining, but the blockage could occur at different levels. So actually it appears, therefore, that the worst of the gaivas is actually the gaiva against your talmidim, because there the blockage occurs at a higher level. And there, because obviously if you're blocking it at a higher level, it doesn't get to the lower levels, which means the devastation by not treating talmidim in a good way is a greater devastation than even the other two types of gaiva, right? So this is the very, very interesting correlation the Ramak makes, and that is Netzach and Hod are called Limudei Hashem. They are called Talmidim. Yesod is called Ani, and Malchus is called Am Ha'aretz, the dirt, the people of the ground. You know, it's interesting. I remember when Rav Yosef was nifter. It's interesting. I mean, I don't want to overgeneralize, but some people say this sometimes. They say that Rav Yosef, a great phenomenal gadol, was also kind of a man of the people, meaning a man of who enjoyed being with simple people. He didn't have to be only with the great. They say the Litvish Gedolim. Okay, I shouldn't get into just gossip or caricature. The Litvish Gedolim tend to be a little more elitist, and not that Chas v'Shalom they look down, but they like to be with Talmidei Chachamim, right? Those are their people. It says some of the Sephardic Gedolim were more of man of the people. They would hang around with common people. So I remember they made the point that Rav Yosef must have explained how to make tea on Shabbos like 500,000 times in his life. Meaning, typical guy might go over to him in shul and says, "How do you make tea again?" Say, "Well, you have a kli sheni and kli rishon," whatever the details were. It was like a relatively simple question. And he just enjoyed explaining it over and over and over and over and over again to all sorts of Jews who, didn't understand the lumdus of anything. They didn't have the svaras for it or the different machloks and rishonim. They just wanted to know practically, how do you make tea on Shabbos? And he said he had just had a certain enjoyment in just communicating it over and over again. So it didn't have to be the most advanced type of thing. It could be for simple people, to give people, answers to how they would live their lives. So that's the idea of not being miskoya, and then your gorem, that Tiferes connects to Malchus, because Malchus is the ground, Malchus is the dirt, Am ha'aretz, people of the ground, and therefore, when you're miskoya, and you don't want to talk to the Am ha'aretz, your gorem, that Tiferes separates from Malchus. Which ultimately means us, because we get our shefa from Malchus. We get our shefa from the Shechina, meaning all of the light of the Spheros goes into Malchus, and then we get it, right? We get it from Malchus. So when you block Malchus from being Makabel, so essentially we don't have that light, right, at that level. Right? So that's the idea of correlating the notion of gaiva to the siluk, the removal of the midah of Tiferes. Now, to go back a little bit more, so now we'll go backwards. The first level, not to be miskah in your talmidim. So here, the Ramak says a very interesting thing generally. He says you deal with them with ava, with love, but he also mentions a very important concept, Yilamdem kasher yuchlun se'es. That part of not being misga'eh on Talmidim is to teach them in accordance with what they are able to absorb. Right? The analogy always is Torah is light, and when I learn Torah, I'm like a vessel that receives the light. But if the vessel is too small and the light is too much, the light is greater than the vessel. So a Rebbe, a teacher, has to know how to be mitzamtzem, meaning how to shrink it, how to make it accessible. Right? Now, this is an interesting point, meaning a teacher is mechuyev to assess the ability of the student to understand certain ideas and to simplify to whatever degree is necessary in order for the student to understand. So, if a Rebbe were to simply come in and give the Torah at whatever his level is, without regard to the ability of a Talmud to be makabel, so the Ramak says that's a form of arrogance because you're just talking to yourself. Now, it's an interesting question, though. In other words, because there is sometimes a reason to do it that way as well. Meaning, as a general rule, the Rebbe has to be concerned with the capacity of a Talmud to be makabel. Otherwise, it's a form of arrogance in which I really don't care about you guys at all. I'm just going to tell you, my chidushim on whatever it is. On the other hand, sometimes, I'll give you an actual example. I'm not going to mention the name. That there were certain gedolim who would come in, and they would start teaching, and they almost got into a trance. It was almost like a hypnotic trance. I was told, I was not present myself, a certain gadol got up at a siyum of a Maseches, that for Daf Yomi or something, and he talked for over 4 hours, for almost hypnotically. He was almost like he closed his eyes, and he just went on and on and on and on in a very, very, very complicated shir that probably nobody got, or maybe one person got. Maybe I think there was one Talmud who was very close to him and the like. So you might say, well, what is that? It's arrogance. He's talking to himself. He's showing off. He's not caring at all about the capacity of Talmidim to absorb this. What exactly is being done? But there is something that's being done there because you get to see the greatness of Torah. In other words, sometimes seeing godless in Torah could be mashpia on you. It can inspire you, meaning you actually are getting a lesson, even if you don't understand a word that's being said. To see the gadol be connected to the Torah so much can be a very inspiring thing. I mean, I remember, I mentioned before a number of times when Moshe Feinstein would come to Hartford, Connecticut in summers when I was like 9 or 10. So I remember, I didn't understand anything he said. I was not great in Yiddish. I knew some Yiddish, but his Yiddish was hard to understand anyway. Even if you knew Yiddish, it was not my parents' Yiddish and whatever. He was hard to understand, so I didn't know anything he said. But he would speak Sholashudis, not for 4 hours. He would speak 20 minutes, whatever it would be. But it was great just watching him. I looked at his face and looked at the shining glow in his face, and I was inspired by it. So there is a concept sometimes to be exposed to Torah, even if you don't even understand it at all, because you get influenced by kedusha and the like. But those are exceptional things. In other words, as a general rule, a Rebbe does have an achrayus to be able to convey his teachings in such a way that the Talmud is able to absorb. And that's the Ramak says right here. Otherwise, that is called misgo'eh al ha-talmidim. Okay? It's an important thing. I mean, we find that my own Rebbe, the one my Rebbe Muvik, Rav Klefsky, there's an art school biography. You should read about him. St. Louis boy who became a great, great, great Talmid Chacham. He was even in the U.S. Army during World War II. He would spend hours and hours and hours trying to figure out the best way to explain an idea. He knew the idea. He knew the idea very well, but how do I explain it? How do I convey it? He spent quite a lot of time in how to do it, and he was an amazing, amazing Baal Masber. They used to say that he would explain a Ketsos HaChoshen, even an Aborigine would understand it. He said he could explain the Ketsos to an Aborigine, or the walls knew it, and the like. It was that type of thing. You really, it just went into your bones. But that took time. In other words, it wasn't enough that he understood, but he thought exactly what is the best way to convey this idea to a Talmud. And so that's an important little observation. The Ramak is not marich on it, but he says that part of caring about Talmidim is that you convey it in a way that they could be makabel. Now, he then brings, to go on, I'm just pointing out some things in the different paragraphs. Then in the second type of gaiva, in which you look down at aniyim, and you're mavaza, I say. So here he brings, this is a well-known Gemara, you may have learned this Gemara. He brings a Gemara which is, frankly, to me, it is one of the most mysterious Gemaras. It's not the Talmud Devorah's fault, it's not a kasha on him, but he brings a Gemara. This is one of the strangest, most difficult Gemaras in all of Shas. And this is a story involving Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon, who was riding an animal, and he encountered a very ugly man. A very ugly man. And he said to the man, he says, you're so ugly. Why are you so ugly? And the man understandably got offended a little bit. And the man said, go ask my creator. And then the Gemara says, Rabbi Elazar Shimon immediately realized that how could he possibly say such a thing? And he got off the donkey, he started asking Mechila, forgive me, forgive me, forgive me. And the man said, I don't need to forgive you, ask my creator. You attacked God for making me this way. Ask Hashem for forgiveness. And they finally come to a town, and the people recognize Rabbi Elazar Shimon as a big Talmid Chacham, and they surround him. And the ugly man says, who is this fellow? And they say, he's the great rabbi. And he says, I don't think he's such a great rabbi, if this is the way he talks to people. And the Gemara gives the story. Rabbi Elazar Shimon was finally mafayas him, and he was mavakish b'chila, and he recognized how wrong he was. But Chazal actually say that this ugly man was none other than Eliyahu Hanavi, who disguised himself externally in a kind of a repulsive way to test Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon, to see that he wouldn't look down at people in various, for the way they look or the like. Now, the truth is, it's interesting that the Gemara doesn't say he was poor. It says some of the Devorah is like semishing ani with ugly. It's not exactly the same thing, but people that you might normally, naturally look down upon in different ways. But the Gemara itself is a pella. I mean, which one of us? I mean, listen, we are infinitesimally inferior to Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon. No question, right? He is totally beyond us. We wouldn't do that, right? So we wouldn't do that, right? So how is it shaykh that he did that? What exactly was even going on? It's a very, very, very difficult Gemara. But again, the Ramak is just citing it to show that the tremendous, tremendous evil that happens when you look down at people, and how, once again, the way Kabbalistic thought works is, it's very important to understand this, it's not just a matter of your private bank account with Hashem. It's not just, I did something bad, so, I have a negative balance in my bank account. Rather, this is the whole yesod here, you are affecting the cosmic dynamics of the universe. You are gorem that Tiferes will not be mashpia on yesod, right? You see this Kabbalistic thing gives a whole different perspective. It's not just, I did something bad. I'm affecting the whole tzura of all of these inyanim. But be it as it may, as I say, the Gemara itself is really, really a pella. I mean, whenever you see a Tana or an Amora doing something that even we wouldn't do, that's always going to be a kasha, right? How could it be? I mean, they were so much greater than us. Of course, you have this problem in a lot of places. Mechiras Yosef. I mean, a lot of times, we're always asking ourselves, what would I have done in that situation? Would I have thrown my brother in a pit? Would I have tried to kill my brother? So these are questions that you're going to confront like all the time, and you work out different answers. With Yosef, at least the Meforshim tried to give us an answer. They felt that Yosef was a rodef, right? The famous Saporno. Yosef wanted to cut them off from their relationship to Yaakov, just like Avraham expelled Yishmael and Yitzchak expelled Esav. So they thought that Yosef, by bringing Lashon Hara, wanted Yaakov to expel them, so this would have affected the future of their progeny to the end of time. All right, so there was a spiritual cheshbon. But in the case of Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Shimon, it's hard to even see that. Like, what's the point of a gratuitous insult? So we'll talk a little bit more about it.
Thank you for listening to this Awesome production. To find out more and to partner in our mission, please visit ohr.edu.